Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Hello and welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today I am joined once again by my friend and creator, Bijhan Agha, to talk about the latest political thriller comic in the Cobra Olympus issue number 3. So welcome back to the show, Bijhan. I'm so very happy to have you.
It's so wonderful to be back. I love being here.
You are one of my favorite people to talk about, not only because of your love of Wonder Woman and all things comics, but you're just a lot of fun to sort of, you make my day a little brighter.
Oh, thank you. You as well, honey.
I'm going to need that in writing. Oh, I have it on video, though. So. All right. Well, so let's talk a little bit about Cobra Olympus. So I want to know what issue number 3 is about. I know it's a standalone piece, but just so we can get everybody up to speed a little bit, just give us a little bit of backstory on Cobra Olympus and sort of the whole franchise as a whole.
Sure. So the setting is the Time Wars universe, where humans are locked in an eternal struggle, including time travel, with vampire kind. Human and vampire time travelers are battling out through history. And Cobra Olympus is a little slice of that. Cobra Olympus is sort of your average young woman in Seattle in 2015, except she's trans and she's Muslim and she's a lesbian, and that complicates things. But she loves coding and she loves gymnastics until she's conscripted into the Time Wars, and she's given a new cell phone filled with hidden technology, including a nanite suit that converts her into the enigmatic superhero Agent Thaw. So we've had 2 comics so far. The first one focused on really golden age goodness with a big monster story. The second one, we strayed more into the Silver Age with sort of a human versus robots theme and a modern take on Etta Candy in the form of Etta Kitchell. but this time we wanted to do something that was a little more modern, a little more up to date. And so we're doing a political thriller where Cobra Olympus is tasked with trying to stop the assassination of a leftist politician.
Wow, I love it. So let's talk a little bit about the plot then, as much as you can give away of that. What was the inspiration for the plot, and sort of what's, again, I know you can't give a lot, but just as much as you can talk about what's going on.
Well, so there's been an increase in political violence, especially directed towards politicians recently. And even though the story is set in 2015, we saw that it was very quickly after that things started to boil over. And so we're imagining a situation where if someone really wants to try and change the system is going to try and stop them. And if that person gains enough power too quickly, and if that person is able to actually make effective change without being influenced by the system, then something drastic is going to happen. So although this kind of political assassination obviously hasn't happened in quite some time, it's not something that we think is completely outside of the realm of possibility anymore. So
True.
The other thing that we wanted to talk about is that there are 2 groups of people on the left who have a very complex relationship right now, and that is revolutionaries and reformists. And so we wanted to tell a story about a revolutionary and a reformist who have to try to work together despite their differences in order to try and make some sort of positive change. In this case, saving the life of someone who can actually do something useful. So yeah, we wanted to try and root it in something that was meaningful and modern.
I love it. I would love to talk a little bit about those ideologies a little bit. How what was your approach at sort of writing these differences and incorporating and crafting the themes around that? And why was it important? Like you just touched on it just a little bit there. I'd love to know why it was important to sort of explore that conflict a little bit.
So the two characters who are at odds and yet have to work together are Cobra Olympus herself, who represents a revolutionary viewpoint, and the other person is Luz Piedra Buena, who is the leftist politician who is trying to create positive change. And the difference is that they have completely different experiences. Cobra actually knows that in the future, no genuine change is actually possible until they root out the vampire menace. That as long as there is this grand, I mean, it's literally a conspiracy of the bourgeoisie trying to try and, as long as that conspiracy is perpetuating itself through propaganda, through systemic power, then there can be no genuine change. And yet on the other hand, you still have Luz Piedra Buena, who is she understands the system so much more clearly because she lives in the present. It is the world that she lives in, and it is her reality. She doesn't have the luxury of being able to mentally live in the future, a future that may never come to pass and which she will never live to see. And so she wants to make concrete, actual change for the people around her in meaningful ways, and not just live on a fantasy that someday everything's going to be fine because we're going to solve all the problems through a wizard did it. So, and you have this very rubber meets the road situation where both people have completely legitimate points to make. The future that we could have versus the present that we do have. And I feel like the task that we have as storytellers is to try and bring that discussion into everybody's hands as a comic. So that's what we tried to do.
I mean, I'm already in, so yes. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that this is kind of a standalone. So within sort of the Time Wars universe, you're designing this one as more of a standalone thing. So I would love to know how you approach that, finding that balance of making it accessible for new readers while also for your fans along the way, such as myself. It's still rewarding. It's still sort of something that you can enjoy while being a fan of Time Wars.
Yeah, so there's a great thing that Stan Lee said. I think he worded it a little oddly, but what he meant to say is any comic could be someone's first comic. And so I have been trying to, and I hope to continue trying to, make any given entry in the Time Wars series a point of entry for someone. That they don't need to be, you don't need to have already understood all of this mythology in order to go into it, and that any given piece of any of our books, any of our comics should contain all the relevant information. And I feel like this is a huge problem for a lot of movies in particular, certainly comics, even some novels these days, where the required reading list is longer than the book itself or the movie itself. I think a movie that had a huge problem with that was the most recent Captain America movie, in that you needed to have watched a phenomenally long miniseries, a good miniseries, but a phenomenally long miniseries that not many people watch. You also need to have watched a movie that came out roughly 20 years ago, at this point starring actors who are no longer relevant in modern media, the modern media landscape. And without that information, you could not enjoy the movie. It was not possible to understand the relationships between the individuals without a comprehensive understanding of where they had come from. And I feel like they didn't need to necessarily change everything about the movie, but they should have designed it in such a way that you didn't need to already know information before coming into the theater, because most people didn't. Even if someone knew the one thing, even if someone had recently watched the old Hulk movie, maybe they hadn't watched the Winter Soldier and Falcon. There were so many missing pieces. Would they even have seen the news that the guy Harrison Ford playing is the same character from the Avengers movies?
Well, and to your point, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in because
Yeah, absolutely, please.
I had the same issue watching the movie. I was like, okay, and I saw it in a theater, and so I'm like, I'm so used to being at home, and I'm like, okay, I have to stop, and I have to like, I need to research this. What happened here? And so I wasn't able to obviously do that in the theater, and so coming home, and I was like, I had to go back and look at stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, I do remember this now, but that was like a decade ago. I can barely remember what I did last week. And so, I feel that frustration, and I appreciate the fact that you are sort of approaching it so that any point in the story can be an entry point, because I definitely felt that with the last Captain America
Yeah,
movie.
and I feel like a huge thing that's been forgotten is that changes in status quo only matter if there is a status quo for any meaningful period of time. If every movie changes the status quo, then there just is no status quo, and therefore there's no shock when it changes. And another thing is that crossovers are only fun when they're characters you already care about because of their own independent adventures. So what I really want to do with the Cobra Olympus series and with the Time Wars brand as a whole is create a series of good standalone products that are fun and interesting on their own, but when you put them together like a puzzle, they all become one image.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit about the creative team around this. So, is there a creative team who's on it, and in particular, like I want to talk. I'm trying to sort of drive at like the artists and sort of how they're involved and what they're bringing to the product visually.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have an editorial team, and the leader of that is my editor, Ray Sachs, my husband.
Ray.
Absolutely wonderful job. Absolutely does a great job reading every script, looking at every, and that's the my contribution to the art is I do what are called PCAR pages. So Harvey Pekar was a 70s and 80s comics author, and he wasn't much of an illustrator. A lot of people didn't see it coming that I was really into Harvey Pekar because I'm such a fantasy and science fiction girl. And Harvey Pekar really changed the game for me in terms of storytelling. I really feel like he does a great job of telling stories. So I was really into Harvey Pekar comics, and so he just slice of life stuff. And so I do use the same technique he did because he wasn't much of an artist, but he knew how he wanted the panels and pages to be laid out. So he would draw stick figures and write in by hand what they were saying in the word bubbles and the thought bubbles. And
that's what I would do.
yeah, and so mine aren't quite stick figures; they're more like balloon people. They're a little round. Everything's a really long oval, but I basically do that where I lay out the panels and I draw out like where they should be standing and how they are relative to each other. What's the perspective? And because my drawings are so terrible, I also accompany them with a script. So the script describes each panel so that they can see and be described to what happened. Because the artist, we have two artists, and the artist who works on this comic is Swap Trap. And he is a phenomenal, he's from India, and he started as a graphic designer for advertisements. And he expanded out to start doing designs for the album covers of hip hop artists. And so Cobra 1 was his first comic project, but he was a huge fan of Golden Age comics. He has a huge Jack Kirby collection. He loves Jack Kirby. In fact, he wanted to just emulate Jack Kirby's style, but I insisted on us at least incorporating a few elements of Harry G. Peters and Bill Everett. And he got really on board with that. He loved that idea. And, we really had a great time going through old comics because I have a huge collection. I scanned a bunch of examples for him. We went through different things like, how do knuckles look when Jack Kirby draws them? How do lips look when Harry G. Peters draws them? So, for example, you'll see in the comics that the lips of women are black in the comic because that's the way Harry G. Peter drew them, because it provides depth without actually requiring a lot of detail. And we wanted to create that sort of good old fashioned look. We were specifically trying to imitate the look of comics printed in the age when everything was ink and you didn't have any of this digital shading, and so we intentionally go for big bold black lines and then these block colors because we feel like it's a much bolder, much more striking appearance.
I know a handful of storyboard artists and animators that love this. So you're speaking their love language, my friend. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the collaboration, especially between you and Ray Ray. And I'd love to know if there are any moments in the story where things kind of took an unexpected turn for you in collaboration together. Like, what if, like, you know, what surprising things happened in putting all this together?
That immediately makes me think of something in particular, which is that so I started making these characters and telling these stories, and I was just reaching from deep personal spaces. But as I was showing them to Ray Ray started noticing that I had inserted very specific things from our own life into the stories that I hadn't realized were specific, you know, like references to specific experiences that we had. I was like, oh my God, I totally did do that. And so one example is in this comic, Dorothy, Cobra's girlfriend, and Cobra have a discussion about politics, and Cobra is initially very, very hesitant to be committal on describing what their politics are like. And that actually happened to me and Ray Ray, because we're both extremely far left of center. But that can be very off-putting when meeting a new person to hear, you know, like, eat the rich. So when we first started dating, it took us a while for us to go, eat the rich a little, eat their toes, maybe a foot. And so it took, yeah. And so it was a process to try and you know, open up about our political identities, because it can be such a minefield for so many people. When you're just trying to get to know someone, it's not necessarily the thing you want to wade into the middle of. And so that made its way into the comic, was the idea that Cobra is just really afraid of opening up about what her real politics are, because it's such a new relationship and she didn't expect it to escalate.
So that is actually, it inspires another question. And I'm going to talk about Cobra a little bit as a character, and especially Cobra's growth over, you know, I know you're only 3 issues in, but I feel like from the very first time that we talked about Cobra, there's been a lot of growth here. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, we do have the luxury of having a year between each issue, which is something that a lot of comic creators don't have. Because we're working at our own pace, we're able to take a lot of time on each script. And before we even started writing scripts, I had already written out my plans for how the character was going to grow and change over the course of 6 issues. I also wanted to make sure that it remained a 6-issue miniseries, and that she could then become a supporting character in other stories, or that we could have spin-off stories about her, but that the miniseries could remain a small and complete collection that stands on its own. And so we really wanted to make sure that, again, in each story, we see a little growth, because she has to come to terms with something through the course of the story. But as those lessons and that growth accumulates, she starts to become a truly different person. And so we're about halfway through the miniseries now, and she's really showing signs of coming into her own as a hero, coming into her own as a girlfriend, coming into her own as an adult. This is all of these stories take place in 2015, and it's a year of tremendous change for her, just as it was for everyone else.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, what's one of the things about Time Wars being about time travel is that we can tell stories that are timeless by being anchored to the moment in time they take place. And so by being an expression of what America was in 2015, we're able to tell the story about how she goes from being just some girl to being the Cobra Olympus.
So I absolutely love the way your brain works. I really do. I love talking to you about story. I feel like I could kind of get lost and go on and on and on. So I was kind of hoping maybe you'd give us a little bit of a peek behind the curtain at your creative process and sort of what it's like to write. I know what I love is that you take your time in between all of these to really kind of work on story and craft the story. And I'd love to know sort of a little bit about that creative process, and maybe as a bonus, what was the hardest thing to write so far?
Ooh, okay. Well, I think that's a really good question. Okay, so I'll start with my creative process. My creative process is mostly compulsion. I just start having ideas, and they must make their way out of my body and onto something, into some sort of solid form, or it'll fester in me. I have to release the pressure in my brain by getting all of the ideas out. So it's very intense coming up with ideas and not having an outlet for them, which is one of the reasons why we're having so many comics at once going on, because I couldn't just stick with just Cobra Olympus. She wasn't the only, there was more room in my heart than for just one comic book series. So we've got many more comic book series coming out. It's my favorite way to spend time. I mean, I love video games. I love watching TV. I love spending time with my loved ones. But if I don't physically spend time writing and thinking about stories, thinking about characters, thinking about relationships and growth and metaphors and meaning, then I just start to go a little nutty. I start to become, a little bat in the belfry. So it's, and a lot of it I think is in great part due to the fact that I am autistic, and I believe I have ADHD based on what I'm learning. I need to get properly diagnosed, but it comes with a lot of great long periods of intense focus. And so I will get caught up on an idea or a concept and a story, a character, and it's all I can do. It's the only thing I can do, and I have to. Sometimes that means that I have to be reminded to eat, and I have to be reminded to take a shower, and I have to be reminded to feed the cats. The cats are coming to meow, meow. Oh shit! So
4 days later, it's like, oh, okay,
yeah. Poor skinny cats. but it's yeah, I'd say that it's I think I don't literally believe in muses, but I do understand why people would, because it doesn't always feel like it's 100% coming from inside of me. It feels like it's something that someone put in my brain, and now I have to release it out into the world to be free.
I have certainly been in writing moments where there was one that was probably almost 30 hours long. And, I'm in I just remember like the last 10 of those, I couldn't stop. It just was coming like rain, and just, you got to get it out. And yeah, I've been there. I can relate to that feeling.
I think I have an answer to the question as to what the hardest thing to write was. And that would be my latest novel, The Starship Tatanka, Border of Terror, which is available on itch.io. It was really difficult because I actually wrote a whole first draft, the whole thing, and hated it. Just hated it. It was no good. I knew it was no good. And I knew that the story and the characters existed in me. And I had just had a failure to write them out properly. So I had to go back and do just charts and charts of planning as to where are these characters' relationships going? Am I reflecting growth and change in their relationships? And so the story, the plot was sound. It was the story that was an issue. The plot, the actual this happens, then that happens, then that happens. That part was fine. But what I needed to make but as it stood, it was a military science fiction story. And what I needed to make it into was a sexy political thriller with polyamorous queer triads that involves a huge amount of action. And so it took me the better part of 6 months to actually rewrite it. And it's now, as it's released, I'm very proud of it. But it took a humongous amount of effort to get there.
Oh, wow. I have to check it out. So I will definitely be looking at that. So So you're no stranger to genre blending, and I know you've certainly done it here with elements of science fiction. Now you're including political commentary. You just talked a lot a bit about bringing in a lot of action in order to drive story. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about sort of blending all those worlds together, and what about it just excites you and lights that fire.
Well, so an unusual thing happened which is that when I was a kid, we had a VHS player or a VHS player. I mean, it's literally not what it's called. It's called a VCR. That's how long it's been since I've actually utilized one. It's called a VCR. We had a VCR. We had VHSs, but we didn't have the original Star Wars trilogy on VHS. So I didn't get into Star Wars through the movies. I got into Star Wars through the comics and the novels.
Oh,
to me,
wow.
the star of Star Wars was Wedge Antilles from Rogue Squadron. So he was my favorite character because I read more comics and books about him than I did about Luke or Han or anyone else. So it was actually quite some time before I even saw the movies, and even longer before I could rewatch them on any kind of reliable basis. So when I was enjoying things like, and a similar thing happened with Star Trek. I did not have access to the original series in any meaningful way, except reruns on the Sci-Fi Channel, and we didn't have cable. So I could only ever see it at other people's houses. So, but I had an aunt who was really into Star Trek, and she had bought all of these pulp paperback novels that were, they'd come out once a month.
I remember
they were
those.
numbered.
Yep.
Yeah, they functioned exactly the way the comics industry functioned, with crossovers and characters and settings getting their own titles, and they're coming out monthly. It functioned exactly like comic books, but they just were novels. And when she found out that I had been learning how to read, she dumped a huge amount of these novels off on me. So for me, the classic Star Trek stories are about like mutant humans from the future coming back in time, and the show. I now have had the opportunity to rewatch the show many times over. Season 3 less often than the others, but I now have had a chance to watch. I've seen every episode many times. But when I was growing up, it was the books. It was the paperbacks. So for me, multimedia has always been the thing. I can read a book about a character, then I can go watch a movie about the character, then I can go play a video game about that character, and they'll all be meaningful interpretations of that character. And I think it's one of the reasons everyone's so excited to see their favorite book, or not anymore because they've screwed it up so many times, but people used to be excited to see their favorite book get turned into a movie, or their favorite comic book get turned into a movie. Because it's a new opportunity to interpret the character in a new way and see them through a new lens, or the setting, or the concepts of the setting. I mean, even something like Andor, where there's almost no characters from the original or any of the real main movies, even though there's Mon Mothma at best, it's still looking at the same setting, the same things that the other characters have to live through. And so being able to see such a multifaceted view of the world makes it feel more real and makes it feel more lived in. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have really, embraced things like Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, is because they're not limited to just one art form. They're able to be expressed in all these different kinds of art forms, and expressed by so many different artists and creators who share a vision. So I think that's what I really enjoyed. Yeah.
And I am a big fan of books to movie, and I don't always want them to be a 1-to-1 match. I want it to be different. I've read the book. But I love these characters, and I want to see them do something a little differently. So
exactly, and
never.
I think a great example of that is that Star Wars TV shows that focus on Jedi are just a little less interesting than the ones that focus on the scoundrels and and it's because movies pack a little more punch. It's all condensed. It's one little story, so you can say your piece and make it out of there before you sound preachy. But when you try and turn a 1 hour sermon into a week of talking about the same thing over and over again, it doesn't have the same impact. It could be the truth, and it would just wear thin after a while. So I think there's a reason why, different art forms lend themselves to different forms of storytelling. They say the medium is the message, and that's why I would never have a Cobra Olympus movie which was an adaptation of the comics or a reinterpretation of the origin. I would love to have a Cobra Olympus movie or TV show which was just a totally separate continuation of her adventure, something that happened after the comics.
Yeah, another version of the story.
So. Right, and so just like keeping the comics as I love the idea of keeping the comics canon, but at the same time, she would be on a new path of her life. She wouldn't. Maybe she's not Agent Thaw anymore. Maybe she's trying to retire, and they're not letting her out. There's some new reason why we're telling this story. It's not the same story. It's a new story. So why are we telling this story? So that's what I would like to do.
And to that point, that reminds me very much of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't know anything about what's coming, but I love the fact that they're not rebooting it, but they're picking up the story again with the same characters, and I'm very, very excited to see what they do with that. So
I think they did a lovely job doing an almost identical thing with the Star Trek the Original Series movies. Mm-hmm. Those movies, especially the last few, are about aging, and it's a very, even as a child, I could understand that accumulating so many experiences takes a toll on someone, that just to know, it's almost Lovecraftian to know something, to know so much that it actually does psychic damage to you. And I can certainly feel it now that I'm an older person than just a babe. But yeah, that aging is something that people have to deal with, and that's a beautiful story that they are able to tell that has nothing to do with the original series. So yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about this Kickstarter now. So tell us a little bit about the Kickstarter. What are some of the perks? What are your goals? Just give us all the details.
Yeah, so our goal is to print 100 copies of the first edition. And so that means that if we get 100 people to back us at the physical level, or 100 comics backed at the physical level, that we will cut off the pledges for physical rewards, because this is a collector's edition. It has a special gold border. It will not be available anywhere except in stores that back us on Kickstarter. We will be putting out a print-on-demand version later. It will not be collectible. And so we also have digital rewards for people who want to get digital rewards. They're also available as add-ons, so you can get both. And the main digital rewards are the PDF of the comic, as well as a video comic with full sound. So we actually originally made it for people who have disabilities that don't allow them to physically hold a comic book. So they can just place their screen in front of them, sit back and relax, and enjoy the comic that way. But we're making it available to absolutely everyone, just however you want to enjoy it, whatever's easiest for you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and we also have the ability to send a comic to a U.S. prisoner who has requested queer literature through LGBT Books to Prisoners.
Wow.
So it's a nonprofit. They have sent out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books so far. We're hoping they can send out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comics. Our favorite tier is the allyship tier, which gets 2 comics to you and 5 to U.S. prisoners. Each one going to a different U.S. prisoner. And there's no vetting process for this. The only minimum they need to meet is 1, be a person in the United States who is imprisoned, and 2, have asked for queer literature through the program, and nothing else is required. And
I love that.
Yeah. And so it's a great way to resist a lot of the actions that are happening in the United States right now, because there's a lot of things happening right now. I'm sure we don't have time to get into the details, but
it's a whole other episode.
But there are people who are imprisoned right now who could really just use a nice, fun comic book, if nothing else. And so we really want to get this limited edition out, and we have a ton of digital rewards. all at the best possible prices we could possibly make them. And we're all actually already almost to our goal. So maybe by the time this comes out, we'll have already met it. But we're very confident that we'll be able to ship everything out on time. We just recently, for our last Kickstarter for Ash Gray and Saturn Olympus, which will be available print on demand very soon and as a PDF. That is about Cobra Olympus's ancestors in the 1800s. So Ash Gray and Saturn Olympus, we had some issues with the printing, but it was all really easy to figure out. It was one, it was a miscommunication about which files I needed to upload. And then two, I uploaded the wrong files after that. So we were able to get it sorted really quick, and those are getting printed right now. So I have full confidence that even if I screw up like that again, these people will catch it. They always have, and we'll always be able to send out a high quality product on time.
Well, that is fabulous. I love it. I will have all of that information on screen for the video version. It will be in the show notes as well. And as always, my friend, you're an absolute delight. So thank you so much for coming and talking to me about this wonderful universe you've created. And I cannot wait to see what else there is to come. We're only halfway there.
So. Well, soon we will have a cheesecake together, my friend.
I love it. Yes, let's do it. All right. That's it for Quills and Chills, guys. We'll see you next time, and ciao. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.